The morning my children handed me an old Samsung Galaxy with a cracked screen protector and told me it was for playing Tetris, I smiled, said thank you, put it in my cardigan pocket, and spent the next 4 months waiting for them to need it back. I did not wait passively. I want to be precise about that, because patience and passivity are frequently confused, and they are entirely different things. Patience is active. Patience is the discipline of a person who knows what they are holding and has decided when to use it. Passivity is the condition of a person who has stopped paying attention. I have not stopped paying attention in 68 years, and I did not stop on the morning they gave me the phone. My name is Adele Christine Fontaine Beaumont, and I am the widow of Leonard James Beaumont, who built, far from a single construction equipment rental company in Savannah, Georgia, in 1978, a diversified infrastructure services corporation with operations in 11 states and an enterprise value at the time of his death of $51 million. I use the specific number because precision matters in the telling of financial stories, and because the number 51 million, not 50, not 50-something, 51, is the number that my children forgot I knew to the penny. Leonard died in the February of last year after a heart attack that was sudden in the clinical sense and entirely unsurprising in the sense that Leonard had been doing everything a doctor would tell you not to do for the better part of 2 decades. He worked 16-hour days. He ate badly. For he did not sleep enough and did not exercise at all, and responded to stress with the particular stubbornness of a man who believes that acknowledging the stress is the same as yielding to it. I had been telling him these things for 23 years. He had been hearing me without listening for most of them. He was the love of my life. He was also, in certain specific ways, the most exasperating person I have ever known, and these 2 facts are not in contradiction. When Leonard died, the company, Beaumont Infrastructure Group, Incorporated in Georgia, with subsidiaries in Tennessee, the Carolinas, Virginia, Florida, Alabama, Texas, Louisiana, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, passed into the hands of our 3 children as specified in the operating agreement Leonard and I had drafted together in 2009. When it had become clear that the company was large enough to require succession planning, and that succession planning required us to think carefully about what we wanted and not just what was easy. The 3 children are Marcus, 44, Diane, 41, and Kevin, 38. Marcus and Kevin had been working in the company for years, Marcus as the VP of Operations, Kevin in Business Development. Diane had come on board as CFO 18 months before Leonard died, having spent the previous decade in corporate finance in Atlanta and brought genuinely useful institutional knowledge to the role. They were not incompetent. I want to be clear about this because the story I am telling is not about incompetent children who deserve to fail. It is about competent children who made the specific error of conflating competence with authority, and authority with the permission to dismiss people who know more than they do. In the first month after Leonard's funeral, they were attentive. In the second month, they were busy. In the third month, the board meetings to which I had always been invited as a non-voting observer began to occur without my being informed of them. By the fourth month, the situation had organized itself into what I recognized from a distance as its true shape. My children had decided, in the way that people decide things they do not say directly, that the company was theirs now and that my role in it was ceremonial at best. and inconvenient at worst. The phone was the most concrete expression of this decision. It arrived on a Tuesday morning in May. Marcus brought it. He set it on the kitchen table with the particular careful casualness of someone who has rehearsed the gesture, not dramatically placed, not thrust forward as a challenge, but set down as if it were simply the natural next item in the morning's business. "We've been thinking, Mom," he said. "You spend a lot of time alone in this house. We thought you should have something to stay connected. Play some games. Keep your mind active." I looked at the phone. It was an old model, not ancient, but 3 or 4 years behind current. The screen protector had a crack across the lower left corner. The phone itself was in a utilitarian case that suggested someone had picked it up from a drawer rather than from a store. "Stay connected," I said. "And Diane thought you'd like Tetris," Marcus said. "She said you used to play it on the old Nintendo when we were kids." I did used to play it. I was, in fact, very good at it. I can see the shapes now, their rotations, the satisfying geometry of a well-organized stack that suddenly has room for the long piece. I can still hear the music. "That's thoughtful," I said. I picked up the phone. It was locked as phones are. The lock screen showed a generic wallpaper, a blue sky, white clouds, the kind of thing set as a default by people who have not yet personalized a device. It had been reset, wiped clean, set up as a new phone, apparently for my use, for games and connectivity and whatever else older women are imagined to require from their technology. "What's the passcode?" I asked. "Oh." Marcus reached across the table and typed 6 digits. The phone unlocked to a home screen with 3 apps on it: Tetris, a phone dialer, and a contacts list that contained my children's numbers. "We set it to something simple so you wouldn't forget." I looked at the 6 digits on the screen for a moment after he typed them. Then I pressed the lock button and put the phone in my cardigan pocket. "Thank you, Marcus," I said. He nodded. He told me he had to get back to the office. He left. I sat at the kitchen table for a while, listening to the house. The particular quiet of a large house in which a person has lived for 23 years, and which has absorbed into its walls and its light, and the particular way the floors settle in cold weather, the whole of a shared life. I thought about the phone in my pocket. I thought about what I knew that Marcus did not know I knew. I picked up my own phone, my real phone, the iPhone that Leonard had insisted on buying me every 2 years, kept updated and backed up and functioning correctly, because Leonard had been a man who believed that tools should be maintained, and I called my attorney. Her name is Patricia Wells, and she has been my personal attorney for 16 years, separate from the company's legal counsel, because I had decided in 2007 that I needed my own representation that was mine and not shared. "Patricia," I said, "I need you to pull the corporate trust documents. All of them. Specifically, the emergency authorization structure that Leonard set up in 2015. There was a brief pause. Then Patricia said, "I'll have them on your desk by tomorrow morning." "Good," I said. I looked out the kitchen window at the garden. The azaleas were blooming, these which they do every May, which they had been doing every May since I planted them in 2001, which they would keep doing after I was gone, which they had done without interruption through every May of Leonard's life and continued doing after his. "Patricia," I said, "pull the 2 FA authentication records too, for the emergency trust account." Another pause, longer this time. Then, Adele, do you have the phone? I have the phone, I said. Oh my, she said. I waited for the full weight of the situation to reach her. It arrived clearly in her next silence. Do your children know about the trust account's authentication setup? She asked. No, I said. Leonard didn't tell them. He told me, and he told me not to say anything unless it was necessary. And is it necessary? I thought about the phone in my pocket, the locked screen, and the 6 digits that Marcus had typed into it while I watched. The 3 apps, Tetris, Dialer, Contacts. Not yet, I said, but it will be. You cannot understand what was in that phone without understanding what Leonard was, what I was, and what we had built together for 23 years. Because the phone was not an accident. Leonard had not made accidental decisions about important things since approximately 1985, which was the year he realized that careless decisions were costing him money and systematically changed the way he made them. The phone was the last deliberate decision of a very deliberate man. I met Leonard Beaumont in 1999 at a Chamber of Commerce dinner in Savannah that I had attended because my employer at the time, a regional engineering firm where I served as the director of contracts and procurement, had purchased a table. Leonard was already substantial by then, 52 years old, gray at the temples, with the particular ease of movement of a man who has been physically strong his whole life and has arrived at the age where the strength has become a quality of presence rather than of appearance. He was the kind of man who takes up exactly the room he is entitled to and not an inch more, which I found in an industry not known for this particular quality, immediately distinguishing. I was 43. I had been divorced once, a long time before, and had spent the intervening years becoming exactly the person I intended to be, rather than the person it might have been easier to be, which requires more time and more deliberate effort than most people realize. I had a background in contracts, procurement, and financial oversight. I had spent 18 years in the engineering and infrastructure services industry, and I understood the specific language and the specific risks of the business Leonard was in, which meant that when we talked at that dinner, not the social surface talk, but the actual talk that happened after the speeches were over, and the room had loosened, and I said something precise about a procurement clause in an industry contract that made him look at me with genuine attention. I was talking in his native language. We were married in 2001. I was 45 and he was 54, and we both knew what we were doing and chose it with our full faculties intact, which is the best possible foundation for a marriage. I want to describe what our 23 years together actually looked like, professionally, because this part of the story is frequently misunderstood by people who only know its ending. What they see is a widow, a house, an old phone, and a board meeting. They see the ending and work backward and construct a narrative in which my role in the company was marginal and my presence at important decisions was ceremonial. This narrative is incorrect in every particular. From 2001 to 2009, I served as a formal consultant to Beaumont Infrastructure Group, not as an employee because Leonard and I had agreed that the distinction mattered both legally and operationally. I reviewed every major contract before execution. I consulted on every significant credit facility. I analyzed every acquisition prospect and wrote the financial assessments that Leonard brought to his board. I was compensated at a rate commensurate with the value I provided, which was considerable, and I maintained my own financial identity, my own accounts, my own advisory relationship with Patricia, my own equity that I had built independently, because I had learned from the experience of my first marriage and from watching other women in the industry that a woman's financial independence is not a negotiating position, it is a necessity. In 2009, when Leonard and I formalized the succession planning and rewrote the operating agreement, I stepped back from the formal consulting role and became what the agreement described as a non-voting observer, a status that reflected a genuine decision we had made together based on the children's growing involvement in the company to create clear lines of authority that did not require constant navigation of the relationship between Leonard's professional role and my advisory one. I did not step back because I was done. I stepped back because stepping back was the right decision for the company at that time, and Leonard and I made it together, the way we made all significant decisions. I continued to review documents. I continued to read the financial statements. I continued to have in the kitchen and the study and on Saturday mornings when Leonard came downstairs with a problem he had been turning over all night. The conversations that produced the thinking that produced the decisions. These conversations were not recorded. They did not appear in board minutes. They were simply what a marriage between two people who respect each other's intelligence looks like when the stakes are real and the problems are large. My children knew their mother was involved. They did not know the degree of the involvement, because children tend to understand their parents' professional lives at the level of abstraction that is necessary for maintaining the parent-child relationship without conflating it with the professional one. I had not corrected this understanding because correcting it would have required conversations that were not necessary while Leonard was alive and the company was running well. What I brought to Beaumont Infrastructure Group was not capital. Leonard had capital. What I brought was the specific competence of someone who had spent 2 decades understanding how the documents work, the contracts, the trust structures, the liability frameworks, the authentication systems that protect significant assets in the digital age. To date, I had been on the operations side of infrastructure services procurement long enough to understand that the documents are not the formality, that people who do not read them carefully assume they are. The documents are the whole architecture. The documents are the building. Leonard understood this instinctively, which is why he had always taken the documents seriously, and which is why, when he built the trust structure that would protect the company's emergency reserves in the event of his incapacity or death, he had taken it very seriously indeed. In 2015, Leonard had been diagnosed with an arrhythmia that, while manageable with medication, had made both of us think more carefully about succession and contingency. And he had met with the company's attorneys, and with Patricia and with a trust specialist he had engaged specifically for this purpose. And together they had constructed what the trust documents described as the Emergency Reserve Fund, a separate corporate trust account containing approximately $8 million of the company's liquid reserves, designated for use only in defined emergency circumstances, a financial crisis that threatened the company's solvency, a regulatory action that required immediate capitalization, or a legal judgment that exceeded the company's insurance coverage. The account was not accessible in the ordinary course of business. It could not be drawn on by the officers of the company, nor by the board, nor by the trustees designated in the company's operating agreement. It had its own specific access protocol, which Leonard had designed with the help of the trust specialist, and which was, in its architecture, elegant in a way that I recognized immediately as very Leonard. Simple in principle, difficult to circumvent, and dependent for its security on a single point of control that Leonard had placed, deliberately and with full explanation, in my hands. The protocol worked as follows. The Emergency Reserve Fund account was held at a private banking institution in Savannah. Access to the account, any access for any purpose, required two-factor authentication. The first factor was a password held by the lead trustee, who was the company's corporate attorney. The second factor was a one-time authorization code generated by a hardware token, a specific designated device that produced a rotating 6-digit code every 30 seconds, synchronized to the bank's authentication server. The hardware token was embedded in a phone, not any phone, a specific phone, the Samsung Galaxy that Marcus had brought to my kitchen table on a Tuesday morning in May, retrieved, I would later learn, from Leonard's desk drawer at the office, which the children had been cleaning out. They had found the phone, recognized it as old and unremarkable, and decided, without examining it further, that it was an appropriate gift for their mother to play Tetris on. Leonard had told me about the phone in the fall of 2018. He had sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where Marcus would later deliver it to me, and explained the trust structure and the phone's role in it with the thoroughness of a man who has thought carefully about what he is communicating and to whom. Or he had shown me the authentication app on the phone, the way the 6-digit codes rotated every 30 seconds, the way the app was locked behind its own PIN that was separate from the phone's lock screen passcode. The phone's passcode is the date we met, he had said. The app's PIN is the year we married and the month and day I proposed. You'll remember both. I had said, "Why are you telling me this and not the attorneys?" He had looked at me the way he looked at me when he thought I was asking a question I already knew the answer to. "Because the attorneys work for the company," he said. "This is the thing that works for you." I had understood him. I had understood him completely. And if I need to use it, I had said, "What do I do?" "You call Patricia," he had said. "She knows the protocol. She doesn't have the phone. But she knows what to do when you call her with it. Between the two of you, you can authorize any transaction the fund is designed for." I had nodded. I had filed it away, the way I file away things that are important and not yet urgent, in the part of my mind that maintains things carefully and retrieves them without error when they are needed. For 3 years, the phone had sat in Leonard's desk drawer. I had known it was there. I had not needed it. Then my children gave it to me for Tetris. So this is what they thought of their father's legacy: a game, a way to pass the time, an old woman in a cardigan with a cracked screen protector, pushing blocks into rows. Did they really think Leonard Beaumont had left anything without a purpose? Did they really think that a man who checked every document twice and kept records of decisions going back to 1981 had left an unremarkable old phone in his desk drawer by accident? He had not. Nothing Leonard did was by accident. The phone in the drawer was the contingency that the contingency plan was built around, and I had it in my pocket. The 4 months between the phone's arrival in May and the crisis in September were not idle months. I want to be clear about this because I have heard the story told as if I simply waited patiently for my children to fail, which misrepresents what actually happened. What actually happened was that I spent 4 months gathering information, consulting with Patricia, reviewing documents, and building the most complete picture I could of what my children were doing with a $51 million infrastructure company they had inherited from the man who had built it. Patricia Wells is worth describing in more detail here because her role in the 4 months is essential to the story and easily underappreciated. She has been a practicing attorney in Savannah for 31 years. The daughter of a civil rights attorney who practiced from the 60s through the 90s, and she has the particular combination of legal precision and personal courage that is the professional inheritance of a woman who grew up watching her father take cases that required both. She does not tell you what you want to hear. She tells you what the documents say and what they don't say, and what the gap between the two means for your situation. She had been my attorney since 2007, when I had recognized that the company's commercial legal counsel had interests that were the company's interests and not mine. I needed someone whose client I was, specifically and exclusively. Patricia had been that person for 16 years. She had maintained, at my request, a file of corporate records to which my 10% equity status entitled me, updated quarterly. It was from this file that I had spent the 4 months drawing the picture. Some of what I found was reassuring. Marcus is genuinely capable in operations. Leonard had trained him well, and the company's field operations were running with the efficiency that Marcus's attention and rigor produced. The work itself in the 11 states was continuing and in some areas improving. The crews respected him. The project managers reported to him with confidence. In the domain of actual infrastructure services, the equipment rental, the maintenance contracts, the project execution, the company was performing. Some of what I found was not reassuring. Diane, as CFO, had made 3 decisions in the 6 months since taking over that I considered aggressive to the point of recklessness. She had refinanced the company's primary credit facility on terms that increased the interest burden in exchange for an expanded credit line, apparently planning to use the expanded borrowing capacity to fund an acquisition strategy she had outlined in a board presentation I obtained through Patricia's access to the corporate records. The acquisition strategy involved purchasing 2 regional competitors over an 18-month period. The strategy was not without merit. The targets were logical. The synergies were real. But the timing was dependent on a credit market environment that had, by September, deteriorated significantly from the conditions under which Diane had projected the strategy's feasibility. And I had seen this risk in June. I had noted it in the legal pad I keep for exactly this category of thinking. The specific risk of an acquisition strategy built on credit facility projections in a market that showed early signs of tightening. I had discussed it with Patricia. I had not told my children because I was not in the board meetings, and my non-voting observer status had been quietly discontinued. and because walking into a room uninvited to deliver financial warnings is not how I operate. I wait to be asked. I prepare so that when I am asked, my preparation is complete. Kevin, in business development, had committed the company to 3 new contract pursuits that collectively represented a bid value of approximately $40 million. And this was not inherently problematic. Large bid pursuits are part of the business. But 2 of the 3 bids had been submitted with pricing that I recognized when I reviewed the numbers Patricia had obtained as insufficiently detailed for the actual scope, which was a classic early mistake in infrastructure contract bidding. The optimism of the pitch overriding the discipline of the estimate. The combination of these decisions, expanded credit exposure, undercapitalized acquisition strategy, and thin-margined contract bids, created a structure that was fine in favorable conditions and fragile under any significant stress. In September, the stress arrived. The credit market tightened faster than Diane's projections had accounted for. The bank holding the refinanced credit facility began making phone calls about covenant compliance. One of Kevin's 2 undercapitalized bids was awarded, the larger one, which was the one with the most significant pricing gap. And within 3 weeks of mobilization, it was clear that the project would not perform at the margin necessary to support the company's debt service. The other undercapitalized bid was also awarded 2 weeks later, which doubled the problem. At the same time, the acquisition Diane had been pursuing, a regional competitor in the Carolinas, ran into a regulatory review that delayed the expected closing by a minimum of 90 days, during which period the company was obligated to maintain the acquisition escrow and could not redeploy those funds. I was not in the board meetings during this period. I had not been invited to board meetings since July. What I knew from Patricia's carefully maintained access to the corporate records, from my own review of the financial statements I had insisted, through my attorney, and through my status as a 10% equity holder in the company, on continuing to receive, and from conversations with 2 company vice presidents who had been with Leonard for over a decade, and who called me, separately and without coordination, in late September to express concerns they were not comfortable raising internally. On a Wednesday morning in October, Marcus called me. He called at 7 a.m, which told me the severity of the situation, because Marcus is a man who does not call at 7 a.m, unless the situation is severe. His voice had the particular quality I had heard in Leonard's voice in the years when projects were going wrong. Controlled, declipped, the voice of a man managing his distress by narrowing his language to only what is necessary. "Mom," he said, "we have a problem." I had been expecting this call since September. I was sitting in the kitchen with my coffee, dressed not because I had been waiting specifically for this moment, but because I am always dressed by 7 a.m, which is a habit I developed in 26 years of professional life and have never set aside. "Tell me about it," I said. He told me the credit covenant violation, the project under performance on both new awards, the acquisition escrow that was locked, the bank's notification that it was reviewing the credit facility for potential acceleration, meaning the possibility that the full credit balance would be called due immediately, to which would trigger a liquidity crisis that the company did not have the cash to absorb. "How much does the company need to cure the covenant violation?" I asked. A brief pause. He had not expected me to know to ask the specific question, which tells me something about what he thought I knew. 7.4 million, he said. I thought about this. 7.4 million. The emergency reserve fund contained approximately 8 million. It had been established precisely for this category of crisis. A financial emergency threatening the company's solvency. The numbers were not a coincidence. Leonard had sized the fund to cover exactly this kind of problem. And you've looked at all the other options, I said. We've been looking for 3 weeks. His voice had something in it now that I had not heard since he was about 17 years old. The specific register of a man who is out of moves. There's nothing. Not in the time frame the bank needs. I held my coffee cup in both hands. I looked at the azaleas, which were past their spring bloom, and had settled into the plain green of summer, doing their maintenance work, preparing for next year. Marcus, I said, do you know what the emergency reserve fund is? A longer pause. Dad mentioned something about a reserve structure once. We haven't been able to access those records. Patricia says she doesn't have full access to the authentication protocol. No, I said. She doesn't have full access. Silence. Mom, he said slowly, do you know what the other part of the protocol is? I looked at the phone on the kitchen table in front of me. The Samsung Galaxy with the cracked screen protector. The phone that contained a hardware authentication token that generated a rotating 6-digit code every 30 seconds, synchronized to a bank server in Savannah that held $8 million in an emergency reserve account that could save the company that Leonard had built over 40 years. Yes, I said. I know what the other part of the protocol is. The silence on his end was the silence of a man standing at the edge of a significant understanding. The phone, he said. The phone, I said. I let him sit in this for a moment, not cruelly. I want to be precise about this, because what I did was not cruelty, and I do not want it described as such. I let him sit in it because he needed to understand fully what the situation was. And full understanding requires a moment of stillness in which the implications can arrive without interruption. Then I said, I think we need to have a meeting, all of us. You, Diane, Kevin, Patricia, and me, at the house. When can you come? Today, he said immediately. This afternoon. This afternoon, I agreed. 2:00. I ended the call. I put my coffee cup down. I picked up the phone and unlocked it with the 6 digits I had committed to memory, the day Marcus had typed them in front of me, and I navigated to the authentication app, where a 6-digit code was turning over every 30 seconds, as it had been doing, unobserved and patient, for months. I watched 2 cycles, 12 seconds of one code, then 30 seconds of the next. The numbers were what they always were, precise, temporary, authoritative. Then I locked the phone and called Patricia. They've called, I said. I know, she said. Marcus called me 20 minutes ago. He wanted to know if I could access the trust account independently. I told him I could not. Good, I said. We're meeting at 2. I need you here. I'll be there, she said. Then after a brief pause, Adele, what are your terms? I looked out at the garden. I'll tell you when I've thought about them properly, I said. But I know the shape of them. They arrived at 1:55, which told me everything I needed to know about how seriously they were taking the afternoon. Marcus, Diane, and Kevin, driving separately, which they rarely do. They usually carpool to family events, a habit from childhood that has persisted, arriving in my driveway within 4 minutes of each other, which told me they had coordinated the arrival without coordinating the transportation, wanting to appear individually present rather than as a block. Patricia arrived at 2 on the dot, which is what Patricia always does. I had set up the dining room, not dramatically. I am not a woman who creates theatrical environments for important conversations. But I had set the table with the good chairs, and there was coffee and water. So the afternoon light was coming through the windows in a way that the room receives particularly well, which is one of the reasons Leonard and I had bought this house in the first place. Leonard used to say that the dining room light was the best argument for the house's purchase price. I had always agreed. I sat at the head of the table. The chair at the head of the table in this dining room had been Leonard's always, for 23 years of family dinners and business conversations, and the particular Sunday morning meetings Leonard used to convene when he wanted to think through something significant in the presence of people he trusted. He had sat at that head of the table with the particular authority of someone who has earned his place in a room and knows it. I sat in his chair. It fit. My 3 children came in and sat down. Patricia sat to my right, which was her usual position in any meeting where we were aligned. I watched them look at the chair, look at me in the chair, and make the small adjustments of expression that people make when something has reorganized the room's expectations. Marcus registered it and said nothing. Diane looked briefly at Kevin. Kevin looked at the table. "Thank you for coming," I said. Marcus said, "Mom, we don't have a lot of time. The bank's deadline for the covenant cure is—" "I know the deadline," I said. "Patricia has the documents." He looked at Patricia. Patricia looked at him with the particular patience of an attorney in a room where she has nothing to prove. "Let me tell you what I understand to be true," I said, "and you can correct me if I'm wrong." I laid it out. The covenant violation, the project underperformance, the acquisition escrow, the credit facility acceleration threat, the $7.4 million cure requirement, and the $8 million sitting in an emergency reserve fund established by their father in 2015, precisely for this category of crisis. I laid it out in the specific numbered language of a woman who had spent 26 years in infrastructure, services procurement, and who had, in addition, spent the past 4 months reviewing every financial document the company had produced. I laid it out in their language, the language of Marcus's operations reports and Diane's financial analyses and Kevin's business development presentations, because using their language in this room was the most direct way to demonstrate that the language was mine too, that I had not needed a translation, that I had read the documents they had produced as fluently as I had read the documents their father produced for 30 years before them. Diane's face across the table was doing something controlled and uncomfortable. She is the most technically sophisticated of the 3 children, the one who is most aware of when she is being outmatched, and she is old enough to know that being outmatched gracefully is a form of intelligence. "That's accurate," she said. "Good," I said. "Then you understand the situation, and you understand my position in it." Kevin said, "Mom, we need the authentication code. The bank needs confirmation today to even begin the conversation about the cure timeline." "I know," I said. So you'll give it to us? I looked at my youngest child, Kevin, who had not grown out of his childhood habit of rushing toward the conclusion before the conversation had arrived there, who had his father's impatience without his father's discipline, who was looking at me with the particular urgency of someone who has decided that the outcome is agreed and the intervening steps are formalities. I'll give it to you, I said, on conditions. The room changed. It did not change dramatically. Nobody stood up. Nobody raised their voice. But the quality of attention shifted in the way it shifts in rooms where everyone suddenly understands that the conversation they thought they were having is not the conversation they are having. "What conditions?" Marcus said. His voice was level. He is the steadiest of the three, the most like Leonard in the specific quality of controlled presence under pressure. And I had spent 4 months thinking about the conditions, not the specific language. That was Patricia's work, and the draft amendments in her briefcase contained the specific language. But the principles, what I wanted and why I wanted it, and whether what I wanted was fair, which is the question I always ask before I make a demand. Is this fair? Not just to me. Fair in the full sense, to all the parties, to the company, to the legacy that Leonard built and that I had, in my own way, helped to build and had been helping to protect. The conditions were fair, I was certain of this. They were not generous to me. They did not give me more than I was entitled to. But they were not punitive to my children either. They were the conditions of a woman who had been excluded from a company she had helped to build, and who was returning, not as a conqueror, but as what she had always been, an advisor with specific knowledge, a fiduciary with specific obligations, and a mother with specific love for the people around the table. First, I said, I return to the board, not as a ceremonial observer, as a voting member with a seat I hold for the remainder of my life, or until I choose to resign it. The operating agreement will be amended accordingly. Marcus opened his mouth. I held up one finger. Second, all financial decisions above a threshold we will specify, I suggest $500,000, require my concurrence in addition to the board's approval for a period of 3 years, after which the arrangement will be reviewed. Diane made a sound that was not quite a word. I looked at her steadily. She closed her mouth. Third, the company will hire, at its expense, an independent financial oversight committee of 3 members, 2 of whom I will approve, who will review the company's financial position quarterly and report to the full board, including me. The room was quiet. Kevin said, "You're asking us to give you control of the company." "I'm asking you to give me appropriate oversight of a $51 million company that your father built over 40 years, I said. "There is a difference. Control is what you have. Oversight is what prevents the kind of decisions that resulted in a $7.4 million covenant violation within 8 months of taking over." Diane looked as if she had been struck. She had not been struck. She had been told a fact. "That's not," she started. "Diane," I looked at her, "you are very good at what you do, and you made decisions that made sense under the conditions you projected, and the conditions changed. That is not incompetence. It is the normal operation of business in uncertain environments. What is missing is a safeguard against exactly this kind of outcome. A second set of eyes with a long view of the company and the experience to recognize when projections are optimistic." I paused. Your father had that second set of eyes for 23 years. He built the trust structure specifically so that second set of eyes would still be available after he was gone. You chose not to use it. A long silence. Marcus said, "And if we don't agree to the conditions?" I had prepared for this question. I had thought about it carefully, because it is the question that every negotiation eventually arrives at. And then the answer to it determines whether the terms are real or performative. If you don't agree, I said, you will need to find another way to cure the covenant violation. Patricia has reviewed the options. There are none in the available time frame. I picked up my coffee cup. The bank will accelerate the credit facility. The company will face a liquidity crisis it cannot independently resolve. You will lose the business your father spent 40 years building. You'd let that happen, Kevin said. You'd let Dad's company fail. I set down my coffee cup. I would let the company face the consequences of decisions made without sufficient oversight, I said. I am not responsible for those decisions. I was not consulted about those decisions. I was given an old phone and told to play Tetris. I looked at each of them in turn. If you want my help, it comes with the conditions I have named. They are fair conditions. They protect the company, and they protect the people in this room, and they protect the legacy your father built. If you want to debate their fairness, I am willing to have that conversation. If you want to reject them because you find it uncomfortable to share authority with your mother, that is a choice you can make, and you will live with its consequences. The silence that followed was the longest silence of the afternoon. Then Marcus looked at Diane. Diane looked at Kevin. Kevin looked at the table. Something passed between them in that look. The specific communication of people who have known each other their whole lives and who are arriving together at a conclusion none of them wanted to reach, and all of them knew was correct. Marcus said, "We'll need to review the specific language with our attorneys." "Of course," I said. "Patricia has draft amendments prepared. She will send them today." He looked at me. Something in his face, the specific something that had been in his father's face when Leonard was reaching a conclusion he had not wanted to reach and had arrived at anyway because the conclusion was correct. Settled. "All right," he said. I looked at Patricia. Patricia opened her briefcase. I reached into my cardigan pocket. I took out the Samsung Galaxy with the cracked screen protector. I unlocked it with the 6 digits I had memorized. I opened the authentication app. The 6-digit code was rotating. I read the current code aloud, clearly and precisely, while Patricia prepared the bank call. The Emergency Reserve Fund released the capital. And the covenant violation was cured within the deadline. The operating agreement amendments were executed 3 weeks later. It is 7 months since the afternoon meeting in the dining room. I have attended 6 board meetings in that time, all of them in person, all of them with the quality of attention that I have always brought to rooms that matter. I sit at the table, not at the head. That position is Marcus's as CEO, and it is his to occupy. I sit to his left, which is where Patricia sits when she attends, because left is where an advisor sits, and an advisor is, in its best form, what I am. Not a manager, not a second executive. An advisor with a vote, which is a specific and significant thing. The first 3 meetings were uncomfortable in the way that new arrangements are always uncomfortable. The adjustment period, the recalibration of expectations, the specific friction of people learning a new architecture for a familiar room. Marcus was careful. Diane was formal. Kevin was sometimes resentful and then embarrassed about being resentful, and then more formal than either of the others as a result. I have patience for this. I had patience for it in my first professional life. 26 years of walking into rooms where someone had decided I was less than the sum of my credentials. And I have more now, because 68 years of living produces a quality of patience that 40 years cannot quite access. You learn over time to distinguish between the resentment that is personal and the resentment that is situational, and to respond only to the situational kind and wait out the personal. Kevin's resentment was situational. By the fourth meeting, it had begun to diminish, replaced by something I recognized as the first stirrings of genuine professional respect. Not warm, not familial, but functional. The respect of a person who has encountered a colleague with better information and useful analysis and has decided against their initial inclination that the better information and useful analysis are worth engaging with. Diane was the most interesting to watch. She had arrived at the first meeting with the particular defense of very intelligent people who have been outmaneuvered, a controlled formality that functioned as armor, keeping everything at a professional remove, making the interaction technically correct while remaining personally closed. By the third meeting, cracks had appeared in the armor, not vulnerabilities but seams, places where the professional distance was giving way to the engagement of someone who could not, ultimately, resist the specific intellectual pleasure of working through a financial problem with another person who understood it the way she understood it. By the fourth meeting, we had an actual disagreement about a contract bid that Kevin wanted to pursue that I thought was underpriced, a disagreement I made with specific numbers, and a line-by-line analysis that Patricia had helped me prepare. And the disagreement was resolved in a way that incorporated my concerns without simply capitulating to them, which is exactly how a board disagreement should be resolved. By the fifth, Diane had started briefing me the week before each meeting, not because I required it, not because the amended operating agreement mandated it, but because she had arrived at the conclusion, in the particular way that very intelligent people arrive at conclusions they initially resist, through the accumulation of evidence they cannot continue to deny, that my preparation for these meetings produced better outcomes for the company, and that better outcomes for the company were worth the slight discomfort of acknowledging that her mother understood the financial architecture of the business she was managing. I told her after the fifth meeting that I had found her briefing useful and that I appreciated the preparation it represented. She looked at me for a moment with the complicated expression of a woman receiving a compliment from someone she had recently dismissed as irrelevant. And then she said, "Dad always said you were the best financial mind in any room you walked into." I thought about Leonard. I thought about him saying this, which he had said to me directly many times, and which I had not known he said to others. He was biased, I said. He was accurate, she said. We stayed for another hour after that meeting, Diane and I, in the conference room of the Savannah office where Leonard used to hold his quarterly reviews, with the old framed photographs of early Beaumont infrastructure projects on the wall, a bridge in Alabama, a highway interchange in South Carolina, the first major equipment depot in Savannah, photographed in 1983 when the depot was new and the company was small, and Leonard was 36 years old and didn't know yet what he would build. We talked about the company's current position, where it was strong and where it was vulnerable, what the next 18 months required. We talked the way two financial people talk when they are being honest and useful, and the stakes are real. I drove home afterward in the afternoon traffic, along the route I had driven for 23 years, past the landmarks of the life Leonard and I had shared in this city, and I thought, this is what he wanted. Not just the phone, not just the trust account, not just the conditions at the meeting. This, his daughter and his wife in the conference room of the company he built, talking honestly about how to protect what he made. That was the design. The phone was just the mechanism. The two underperforming contracts have been stabilized, not easily. It required renegotiation with two project owners, a subcontractor restructuring that Marcus managed with the operational precision that is his particular gift, and the deployment of a portion of the emergency fund capital that I had authorized after reviewing the recovery plan. The projects will finish at a reduced margin but will not require further rescue. The lessons they produced have been incorporated into a revised bid review process that the Independent Financial Oversight Committee, which has been seated and is functioning, has added to its quarterly review scope. The acquisition in the Carolinas was ultimately abandoned. This was Diane's decision, made after the regulatory delay extended further than the recovery mathematics could support. It was the right decision, and she made it cleanly, without prolonged resistance, which is itself a form of growth. Kevin has not yet fully arrived at the place that Marcus and Diane are moving toward, but he is moving. He is 38 years old, and he has his father's ambition and his father's impatience, and he is in the process of learning, as his father did, that the impatience must be managed and not indulged. I have patience with this process. I have watched it before. The phone is in my study now, on the desk, connected to a charger. It is not just a Tetris device. It is the authentication key to a trust account that I hold on behalf of the company and of my children and of the legacy that Leonard built. And it will be used in accordance with the purposes for which it was designed, which is to say it will be available when there is a genuine emergency, and not available when someone has simply decided it would be convenient. This is the distinction Leonard understood, and that the phone embodies: the difference between a key and a convenience. A key is for a specific lock, used at a specific time, for a specific purpose, by the person who holds it. A convenience is something you hand to someone else because holding it yourself is more effort than you want to spend. Leonard did not make convenience keys. He made real ones. He gave them to people who understood the difference. He gave this one to me. I think about what the Tetris comment cost my children. Not financially. The financial cost of the covenant crisis is quantifiable and is being managed. I mean what it cost them in understanding and the specific education of discovering that the person you have dismissed as someone to play games on an old phone was, in fact, holding the key to the emergency that was 6 months away. The education was not gentle. Educations of this kind rarely are, but they are, in my experience, the most durable kind, the kind that arrive through the specific felt consequence of a decision made in error, rather than through abstract instruction about the kind of decision you shouldn't make. My children are learning. That was always the point. There is something I want to say about technology, because the title of this account suggests it is about technology, and I want to clarify what I mean by that. Technology is not magical. It is not the property of the young or the technically trained. It is not something that exists outside the understanding of a 68-year-old woman who prefers gardening to coding and still writes letters by hand when they deserve it. Technology is, in its deepest sense, simply the set of tools that exist to accomplish the work of the current moment. Every generation has had its tools. Every generation has had people who understood those tools and people who did not. The people who understood the tools in every generation have had the power that understanding tools produces. My children assumed I did not understand the tool because of my age. Because this is the specific form of condescension that the old receive from the young in the current era, and it is both widespread and incorrect, and the incorrectness has consequences of the precise kind I have described. The phone was old. The woman was older. Neither of those facts had any bearing on whether the woman understood what the phone did and why it mattered. Leonard understood this. He had chosen the phone for precisely this reason, not because it was the most sophisticated tool available, but because it was the right tool for the specific function, a hardware token synchronized to a bank server, generating rotating codes that could not be duplicated or spoofed. And because its simplicity and its apparent unremarkableness made it easy to overlook, which was, as it turned out, a feature rather than a bug. And the key to the thing is not always the most impressive-looking part of the thing. Sometimes the key is an old Samsung Galaxy in a utilitarian case, sitting in a desk drawer, waiting to be dismissed as a gift for an old woman with too much time on her hands. Sometimes the person who holds the key is a 68-year-old woman in a cardigan who is very good at Tetris and considerably better at corporate finance. I have thought in the months since the dining room meeting about what the afternoon taught my children. Not just the practical lesson, though the practical lesson is real and will be retained, because consequences produce retention in ways that instructions do not. But the deeper lesson, the one that runs under the practical surface. And the deeper lesson is this: the people who built the thing know things about the thing that the people who inherited the thing may not. This is not a criticism of inheritors. Inheritance is not a lesser relationship to a thing than construction, but it is a different relationship, and different relationships produce different knowledge, and the different knowledge of the builder is not superseded by the inheritor's assumption that they now know everything they need to know. Leonard built the company over 40 years. I was his partner for 23 of those years, and his intellectual companion and financial colleague for all 23 of them. The knowledge I have of that company is not the knowledge of a ceremonial widow who attended Christmas parties and holiday board meetings. It is the knowledge of someone who was in the room when the significant decisions were made, who understood the language in which those decisions were made, and who has spent 68 years accumulating the specific form of intelligence that allows a person to understand what a document actually says beneath what it appears to say. My children did not see this. They saw their mother, an older woman, widowed, comfortable, clearly beloved by their father, entitled to be provided for and respected in the generic way that parents are respected. They did not see the contracts director, the financial strategist, the woman who could read a covenant violation risk in a refinancing term sheet from 40 feet away. They see it now. The Oversight Committee has its second quarterly review next month. I have been preparing for it, and the way I prepare for all meetings that matter, with documents, with numbers, with the specific questions that the documents and the numbers generate, arranged in the order of their importance. I have also been thinking in the evenings in the study about Leonard's design, not just the emergency fund, the whole design, the 40-year accumulation of deliberate decisions that produced the company, and the trust structure and the phone in the drawer, and the wife who knew what to do with all of it. He had been building it his whole life. He had been building me into it as a component, as the part that would function after he was gone. Not because he doubted his children. He loved his children and knew their capabilities, but because he understood that the most resilient systems have redundancy built in, and that redundancy is not an expression of distrust. It is an expression of intelligence. The phone is on the desk. The authentication app turns over every 30 seconds. 6 digits, new 6 digits. The next 6 digits, patient and precise and inexhaustible, doing exactly what it was designed to do for as long as it is needed. That is all any of us can offer in the end. To do what we were designed to do for as long as we are needed, with the full precision of what we know. I played Tetris once in the 4 months between receiving the phone and giving the code. Not because I had nothing better to do. I had everything I have described. The documents, the research, the calls to Patricia, the quarterly reviews, the 2 vice presidents who called me in September, but on a Tuesday evening in July. And with the garden dark outside the window and the study lamp making the room warm and particular, I opened the Tetris app and played for 30 minutes. I was, as I expected to be, very good at it. The shapes still come the same way. The long piece, the square, the S and the Z, the L and the J. And the mind that has spent 68 years learning to see how things fit together still reads the options faster than most. I cleared 12 lines before I stopped. Then I closed the app, opened the authentication app, watched 2 codes rotate past, and put the phone back on the desk. Technology is the weapon of those who hold the key. I held the key. I hold it still. Leonard built the lock. He knew exactly who to trust with the key. He was right. There is a thing I do on Sunday mornings now in the study. Right in the quiet before the day's obligations begin, I take the phone from the charger, I unlock it, and I open the authentication app, and I watch 1 full cycle of the code, 30 seconds, 6 digits, then new 6 digits, and then I put the phone back on the charger and close the app and sit for a moment in the room. I am not checking anything. Nothing needs to be checked. The app is functioning. The account is intact. The company is stable. There is nothing to verify. What I am doing, I have come to understand, is keeping faith with Leonard, who made the choice to trust me with this, with the company, which was built by 2 people and should have the benefit of both their knowledge, and with the succession plan that Leonard designed with the intelligence and the love of a man who understood that the most important decisions are the ones you make about what happens after you. The code rotates. 6 new digits, 30 more seconds of precision. Then I close the app and put the phone down and go to make my coffee. And the Sunday morning begins the way Sundays begin, when you have done the thing you needed to do and can now attend to everything else. Leonard built the lock. He put the key in my hands. He was right to do it, and I am still here.